I am the stone that the builder refused. I am the visual, the inspiration that made ladies sing the blues.
There are a lot of shows I'm nostalgic for, a lot of cartoons I grew up loving, but The Boondocks is different. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. Not because it was comfortable, but because it never tried to be. It was loud, it was messy, it was fearless. And it said things most shows were too scared to even hint at. It wasn't just trying to make you laugh, it was trying to make you think, sometimes in ways that felt almost confrontational. And the older I get, the more I realize something uncomfortable. This show didn't age badly, it aged accurately, because when you look at the world we're living in now, you start to understand why the Boondocks couldn't air today.
Hands up, don't stop, let the whole room say if you miss those days. Let's run it back.
You already heard me say it in the cold open. The Boondocks is one of my favorite shows of all time. From the very first episode, the Boondocks spoke like a dare. It didn't politely ask if you were ready for the conversation. It assumed you were. And if you weren't, that wasn't the show's problem. That's important, because when people talk about why the Boondocks couldn't air today, they usually start in the wrong place. They say things like, people are too sensitive now, or you couldn't make jokes like that anymore. But that explanation is shallow. It ignores what actually made the show dangerous, and what made it special. The Boondocks wasn't dangerous because it used profanity, or racial slurs, or controversial imagery. Plenty of shows have done that and survived. What made the Boondocks dangerous was that it refused to clearly signal who the good guys were. It didn't separate the audience from the critique. It didn't reassure you that you were morally correct for watching. Instead, it implicated you. It forced you to sit in discomfort and figure out for yourself why something was funny or disturbing, or both at the same time. And that kind of storytelling depends on one thing above all else: trust. Trust that the audience understands satire. Trust that viewers can tell the difference between depiction and endorsement. Trust that people won't stop at the surface. That trust is gone.
I'm trying to explain to you that Ronald Reagan was the devil. Ronald Wilson Reagan? Each of his names has 6 letters? 666? Man, doesn't that offend you?
When people call the Boondocks edgy, they're usually reacting to how it made them feel, not what it was doing. Edgy becomes a shorthand for discomfort, but the Boondocks wasn't edgy in the modern sense of trying to shock for attention. It was satirical in the classical sense. Satire exaggerates reality in order to expose it. Huey Freeman was never just a mouthpiece for radical politics. He was a conscience placed inside a world that didn't want one. Riley wasn't just comic relief or a stereotype. He was a symptom, a child absorbing culture without the tools to interrogate it. Granddad wasn't just a selfish old man. He was a portrait of generational fatigue and moral compromise. And Uncle Ruckus, as grotesque as he was never meant to be taken at face value. He was internalized oppression taken to its most absurd, horrifying extreme. The show demanded that viewers hold 2 ideas at once, the literal and the symbolic. That's why it required context, and that's also why it breaks down so easily in today's media environment. We don't consume television the same way anymore. Episodes aren't watched start to finish and then discussed afterward. They're clipped, paused, screen grabbed, reposted, and stripped of framing. Lines meant to function within a 22-minute narrative get judged in isolation. Characters meant to be cautionary get turned into mascots. This isn't a moral failure on the part of viewers. It's a structural one. The internet rewards speed, outrage, and certainty. The Boondocks operated on patience, ambiguity, and reflection. Those values don't travel well through algorithms, and nowhere is that clearer than in the episode that many people now point to as proof the show predicted the future.
I see piss coming, I move. She saw piss coming, she stayed.
Yeah, she did,
And why
but-
should I have to miss out on the next R. Kelly album just for that?
When The Trial of R. Kelly aired in 2005, it felt almost reckless. The episode took a real ongoing scandal, allegations of sexual abuse against a famous R&B singer, and turned it into a courtroom farce. The jury ignores evidence. The defense distracts them with absurd arguments. Fans rally behind the celebrity, not because they believe he's innocent, but because they don't want to lose the music. At the time, many people treated the episode like exaggeration, like Magruder was pushing reality past the breaking point for laughs. But what the episode was actually doing was something much more unsettling. It was diagnosing a cultural reflex. The episode isn't about R. Kelly as an individual. He's a stand-in for a larger phenomenon. The way society protects people it benefits from. The way fandom becomes a shield. The way talent gets used as a moral loophole. Huey's speech at the end of the episode isn't triumphant. It's frustrated. It's the sound of someone realizing that logic doesn't work when people are emotionally invested in denial. And that's why the episode aged the way it did. Years later, when the Me Too movement gained momentum and R. Kelly was finally held accountable in court, The episode stopped feeling exaggerated. It started feeling uncomfortable in a different way. Not because it was cruel, but because it was right. And that's the problem for modern television. Today, an episode like this wouldn't just be judged on its message. It would be dissected for legal exposure, advertiser comfort, and social media blowback. Satirizing a living public figure accused of abuse would trigger weeks of review. Disclaimers would be added, the edges would be sanded down. The bluntness that made the episode effective would be treated as a liability. Not because the topic is off limits, but because the risk is too high. The Boondocks didn't hedge its critiques, it didn't soften them to avoid consequences. And that willingness to be blunt is exactly what modern systems discourage. Because once you challenge celebrity worship directly, you're not just critiquing a person, you're critiquing an entire ecosystem built on protection, profit, and selective morality. And the Boondocks never stopped pulling on that thread.
I got that dog in love.
When the Boondocks turned its attention to hip-hop culture, it did so from the inside. This wasn't outsider mockery, it was critique, born from familiarity, from understanding hip-hop not just as music, but as identity, armor, and survival language. That's why the Gangstalicious storyline is one of the most misunderstood arcs in the entire series. On the surface, the story of Gangstalicious and its follow-up episodes appear to be about a rapper secretly being gay. That's the shallow read. The deeper truth is that the episodes are about fear, specifically the fear that masculinity is fragile, and that if it cracks even slightly, the entire structure collapses. Gangstalicious himself is almost secondary. The real focus is Riley. Riley's emotional breakdown doesn't come from disgust or hatred. It comes from confusion. His hero no longer fits the template he depends on to understand what strength looks like. If Gangstalicious isn't who Riley thought he was, then what does that mean for Riley's own identity? That question is devastating, especially for a child whose sense of self is built entirely out of borrowed culture. In 2005 and 2008, these episodes felt shocking because the conversation hadn't caught up yet. Hip-hop had no public space for vulnerability. Masculinity was rigid, aggressively policed, and deeply tied to respect and survival. The show exaggerated that rigidity to expose how absurd it was. Now here's the irony. In theory, these episodes should be easier to air today. We now have openly queer artists. We have broader conversations about masculinity. We have more visible challenges to gender norms in music and fashion. And yet these episodes would likely be harder to release now. Why? Because the modern conversation would focus less on what the episodes were saying and more on who was allowed to say it, instead of interrogating homophobia, insecurity, and performative toughness. Discourse would spiral into debates about representation, tone, and potential harm. The satire would be flattened into controversy. The original episodes trusted viewers to understand that the target wasn't queer identity. It was the culture that feared it. That level of trust is rare now, not because the audience is worse, but because the ecosystem punishes ambiguity.
Hey, yo, look at those sandals right there, dog. Hey, yo, you said Gangstalicious. He sent them to you as...
Riley Freeman is often dismissed as comic relief, but he may be one of the most important characters the Boondocks ever created. Riley is what happens when culture raises a child faster than community does. His obsession with image, with toughness, with performance is not random, it's learned. And when Riley experiments with clothing that breaks traditional gender expectations, crop tops, flamboyant outfits, accessories coded as feminine, the show doesn't rush to explain itself. It just lets the reactions happen. The laughter doesn't come from Riley's appearance, it comes from the panic around it. From adults and peers scrambling to reassert norms they never bothered to question in the first place. That's the brilliance of the satire. The show never says, this is good or this is bad. It asks a quieter, more dangerous question. Why does this bother you? That question is at the heart of why the Boondocks couldn't air today. Modern media environments are deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity. If something makes people uneasy, the instinct is to resolve that discomfort immediately, either by condemning the content or reframing it with clear moral messaging. But satire doesn't work that way. Satire needs discomfort to do its job. In today's clip-driven culture, scenes like this would be isolated and stripped of context. A moment meant to critique insecurity would be reframed as mocking gender nonconformity. Intent would be drowned out by optics. This isn't about people being too sensitive, it's about how quickly interpretation collapses when narrative context is removed. The Boondocks relied on viewers sitting with unease long enough to interrogate it. That kind of patience is rare now, and rarely rewarded by platforms.
Have you ever tried beating his ass?
What's the belt?
Another reason the Boondocks couldn't air today is far less glamorous, but just as important, how casually it depicted things that modern audiences demand explicit moral framing for. Corporal punishment is one of the clearest examples. Throughout the series, particularly in episodes like Smoking with Cigarettes and others centered on Granddad's parenting, belt whippings are treated as a normalized reality. Not as heroic, not as monstrous, just present. The show doesn't pause to tell you how to feel about it. It doesn't issue a lesson at the end. It simply reflects a practice that was common in many households, especially across older generations. That lack of commentary is exactly what made the depiction powerful, and exactly what would make it unacceptable today. Modern audiences tend to equate depiction with endorsement. If something harmful appears on screen without immediate condemnation, it's assumed the show supports it. This creates an impossible standard for observational storytelling. The Boondocks trusted viewers to understand that showing a practice doesn't mean celebrating it, that reflecting reality isn't the same as promoting it. Today, that trust doesn't exist, not because people are malicious, but because media literacy hasn't kept pace with how fast content circulates. A scene that once functioned as cultural critique would now be flagged, content warned, edited, or removed entirely. And while those concerns come from legitimate conversations about harm and trauma, the cost is the loss of storytelling that shows uncomfortable truths without spelling them out. The Boondocks was never interested in instruction manuals, it was interested in mirrors. And mirrors don't tell you what to do, they show you what is.
Well, I'm Ruckus, Uncle Ruckus, no relation. And I work for Mr. Wansler.
If there is one character who fully explains why the Boondocks couldn't air today, it's Uncle Ruckus. Not because he's offensive, although he absolutely is, but because he exposes a problem. Satire can't survive in the modern era. Uncle Ruckus is not subtle. He is not nuanced. He is not meant to be liked. He is internalized racism taken to such an extreme that it becomes grotesque. A black man who insists he's white, who worships white supremacy, who despises his own people with a fervor that borders on religious devotion. The joke is obvious. And yet, even when the show originally aired, some people missed it. They laughed with him instead of at him. They quoted him sincerely. They treated satire as validation. That misreading wasn't hypothetical, it was real. And in today's media environment, it would be exponentially worse, because Uncle Ruckus is the kind of character who cannot survive clip culture. A rant meant to expose the absurdity of racist ideology would be stripped of context and reposted as a soundbite. A caricature meant to indict self-hatred would be reframed as telling uncomfortable truths. The show would lose control of the message almost immediately. Networks understand this now. They know that satire requiring intelligence, context, and good faith is dangerous in a landscape where bad faith engagement thrives. Once satire can be weaponized by people who believe the character is right, the satire fails. Not artistically, but practically. That's why modern television avoids characters like Uncle Ruckus. Not because the critique isn't valid, but because the audience can no longer be trusted to read it correctly at scale. And the Boondocks never wanted to explain the joke.
Step back, silverback, hold on, blackie. Steal some gas for your Cadillac. Head downtown with the and clowns, just stay away from me.
Nowhere is that risk clearer than in one of the most infamous episodes of the entire series, the story of Jimmy Rebel. This episode centers on a white supremacist country singer whose music is overtly racist, hateful, and intentionally offensive. The character is a parody of real-life hate musicians, and the episode's goal is clear: expose how vile and ridiculous this ideology is by taking it to its logical extreme. But here's the problem. To satirize hate this directly, the show had to reproduce it. The episode features racist language, imagery, and songs that are genuinely uncomfortable to hear, even when you understand the intent. And that discomfort is precisely what made the episode so controversial. Even at the time Adult Swim received complaints, the episode was pulled from rotation. And today, it would almost certainly never make it past a standards and practices review. This raises a difficult question that modern platforms are still struggling with. How do you critique hate without amplifying it? The Boondocks took the risk of trusting the audience. It assumed viewers would understand that the ugliness was the point, that the episode was condemning racism by showing it unfiltered and absurd. Modern content moderation doesn't operate on that assumption. Today, platforms err on the side of removal. If content contains hate speech, even in service of critique, it is treated as a liability. Context becomes secondary to impact. Intent becomes harder to prove than harm. And in that environment, an episode like Jimmy Rebel doesn't just become controversial, it becomes undistributable. This isn't a moral judgment, it's a structural one. Satire that uses the language of hate to destroy hate is now considered too risky to host, which means one of satire's most powerful tools has effectively been taken off the table.
Then say no.
I don't want to say no. your ass you don't stop saying pause.
Pause.
If Jimmy Rebel represents the outer boundary of racial satire, then Pause represents the line, the Boondocks cross that truly frightened the system. Pause didn't just parody a public figure. It critiqued an entire power structure, one built on religion, respectability, branding, and silence. The episode's target was unmistakable, a Tyler Perry-style media mogul who used religious imagery, moral authority, and cross-dressing comedy to build a massive entertainment empire. Beneath that image, the show suggested hypocrisy, manipulation, and exploitation. What made the episode dangerous wasn't just the content, it was who it challenged. Religion is already a sensitive subject. Combine that with sexuality, celebrity power, and corporate influence, and you have a perfect storm. The episode didn't hedge its critique, it didn't anonymize its target enough to be comfortable, and it didn't apologize. So it vanished, not through public outrage, not through viral backlash, but through quiet suppression. The episode aired once, then disappeared from rotation for years. That silence is revealing. It shows where the real limits were, not audience sensitivity, but institutional tolerance. The Boondocks didn't get punished for offending viewers, it got punished for offending power. And that's perhaps the most important lesson of all, because modern television doesn't fear controversy nearly as much as it fears losing access, partnerships, and protection. Satire that challenges audiences can survive. Satire that challenges institutions often cannot.
No one can stand in my way of destroying black people, especially not Huey Freeman.
At this point, it should be clear that the Boondocks didn't disappear because it ran out of things to say. It disappeared because the conditions that allowed it to speak honestly no longer exist. Modern television isn't guided primarily by creative risk. It's guided by risk management. Every show now lives inside a web of incentives and consequences that barely existed when the Boondocks first aired. Advertisers are more visible. Social media backlash is faster. Corporate partnerships are more fragile. And the cost of controversy is no longer theoretical. It's immediate and measurable. A single clip can ignite a backlash in hours. Sponsors can pull support overnight. Executives can be forced into public apologies before a full episode has even been watched. In that environment, ambiguity is dangerous. Satire that relies on context becomes a liability. The Boondocks was built on ambiguity. It trusted viewers to watch an entire episode, to follow an argument to its conclusion, to understand that offensive language could be a tool rather than a goal. Modern networks can't afford to assume that level of engagement, so instead, they preemptively soften content. They remove sharp edges before audiences ever see them. They avoid subjects that might trigger backlash, even if the critique is valid. This isn't censorship in the classic sense, it's self-preservation. And self-preservation doesn't reward the kind of fearless satire the Boondocks practice.
I thought there was a difference between her and... I thought I understood this whole thing, but I guess I don't.
One of the biggest enemies of the Boondocks today wouldn't be critics or activists. It would be the algorithm. The internet doesn't reward slow thinking. It rewards reaction. Satire like the Boondocks requires time. It needs space to build an idea, exaggerate it, and then reveal the contradiction underneath. But clip culture tears those steps apart. It isolates moments and judges them independently of the narrative they belong to. A line spoken by Uncle Ruckus becomes a meme. A joke meant to indict racism becomes evidence of it. A satirical exaggeration gets treated as a sincere statement. And once that happens, the original intent doesn't matter. Outrage cycles feed on this fragmentation. People react to what they think the content is saying, not what it actually says. Nuance collapses. The loudest interpretation wins. This creates a chilling effect for creators. If you know your work will be consumed out of context, you start writing for the clip, not for the story. You over-explain. You flatten the satire. You remove ambiguity so no one can misread it. But ambiguity is where satire lives. Without it, satire becomes instruction. And instruction isn't funny or effective.
This is America. My president is black and my Lambo is blue. Now get the f out of my hotel room. And if I see you in the street, I'm slapping the shit out of you.
It's tempting to frame all of this as a cultural problem, to say audiences are too sensitive or too reactive or too easily offended. But that explanation misses the real issue. The issue isn't people, it's systems. We've built a media ecosystem that monetizes outrage, punishes complexity, and prioritizes scale over substance. Platforms reward content that can be immediately understood, instantly reacted to, and easily categorized as good or bad. The Boondocks refused categorization. It lived in uncomfortable gray areas. It questioned people who wanted easy answers. It critiqued systems that benefited from not being examined. Those qualities don't survive well in an environment designed to maximize engagement rather than understanding. So when people ask why the Boondocks couldn't air today, the answer isn't that the show was too extreme. The answer is that honest satire has become structurally expensive, and most platforms aren't willing to pay that price.
I think from a humor standpoint, particularly the show, allows us to just do so much more than I could ever do in the strip.
Season 4 of The Boondocks is often debated in extremes. Some people dismiss it entirely. Others defend it as misunderstood. The truth sits somewhere in between. Season 4 wasn't terrible television, but it wasn't The Boondocks in the way the earlier seasons were. The difference wasn't animation quality, it wasn't voice acting, it wasn't even subject matter. The difference was authorship. Aaron McGruder's absence didn't just remove a creator, it removed a point of view that was willing to accept consequences. McGruder didn't write from a place of safety. He wrote from frustration, from anger, from exhaustion, with systems that refused to be honest about themselves. That anger gave the earlier seasons their prophetic quality. Season 4, by contrast, felt reactive. Instead of diagnosing problems before they fully surfaced, it commented on conversations that were already happening. Episodes like The New Black and Freedom Land still tackled real issues: cancel culture, economic exploitation, modern slavery metaphors, but they did so with caution. The satire felt more self-aware and less fearless. It wasn't that the show suddenly became afraid of controversy. It was that the environment demanded calculation. Without McGruder's voice anchoring the series, the show felt like it was asking permission instead of issuing warnings. And satire doesn't survive permission-seeking. It survives conviction. Season 4 unintentionally proved a larger point of this entire essay. The Boondocks only works when it refuses to compromise with the systems it critiques.
I think if black people don't want to be called the N-word, they shouldn't call themselves the N-word.
When people talk about losing shows like The Boondocks, they often frame it as a loss of humor. But the real loss is deeper than that. We didn't just lose jokes, we lost a form of cultural self-examination. Satire at its best doesn't tell us what to think. It shows us who we are when we think no one is watching. It exposes contradictions without resolving them neatly. It allows us to laugh and cringe at the same time. The Boondocks did that relentlessly. It didn't let celebrity culture off the hook. It didn't protect institutions from criticism. It didn't excuse internalized harm just because it was uncomfortable to confront. And because of that, it demanded something from its audience. It demanded patience. It demanded media literacy. It demanded the ability to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to resolve it. Those demands don't align well with a media ecosystem built on speed, outrage, and monetization. So satire became safer, clearer, more explicit, less risky. And in becoming safer, it lost its teeth.
Lucky? How is this lucky? I finally found a thing in life that makes me happy, and now they're gonna take it away from me.
So no, The Boondocks couldn't air today, not because people are weaker, not because audiences can't handle hard conversations, and not because satire is dead. It couldn't air because the systems that allowed it to exist no longer reward what it was trying to do. The show didn't fail modern culture failed the environment the Boondocks needed. We built platforms that prioritize reaction over reflection. We built incentives that punish nuance and reward certainty. We built systems that ask artists to preemptively apologize instead of boldly critique. And then we wondered why fearless satire disappeared. The Boondocks wasn't trying to offend people. It wasn't trying to cancel anyone. It was trying to warn us about celebrity worship, about performative morality, about internalized harm, about what happens when culture values comfort over honesty. And now, living in the world it warned us about, the show feels impossible, not because it was wrong, but because it was early. So I'll leave you with this. If the Boondocks were somehow made today, what would it even be allowed to say? What institutions would it still be permitted to challenge? And what truths would be considered too risky to tell? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you land on this. If this video made you think, share it with someone who remembers the show and someone who's never seen it. As always, hit the hype button, like, subscribe, hit notification, and keep the nostalgia alive. A huge shout out and heartfelt thank you to our amazing Throwback Tier members: Peace by Chaos, Dicula, iCritic, Jeremy Bowen, Mr. Blanks, and Sonic and Leighton Fan. Your support means the world, and you're helping keep the nostalgia alive in a big way. I also want to thank all the other awesome members who support the channel. Whether you're new or you've been rocking with us from the beginning, I appreciate every single one of you.